In case you haven't noticed, I'm a huge nerd. I love books. I love vintage clothes, vintage fashion. I love textile arts and all kinds of like textile crafts. And my favorite thing is when those two worlds collide. This is my admittedly very small vintage book collection, and I thought today we could go through it and I can tell you about these books. I thought we could just nerd out together. So the book in this collection that I probably use the most is this one, and it's called Complete Needlecraft. I believe I've mentioned this book in like shorts and stuff. I believe this book was originally published in 1934. This is basically a needlecraft Bible, essentially. I actually use it a lot to check techniques. So because I really like to make things from the 40s, I also like the late 30s styles, but like my favorite era of vintage fashion is World War II. So this would have been written just before the Second World War, and a lot of people would have had books like this in their home and would consult them when making things at home if they had any questions and stuff. And then books like this would have been passed down. So even into the 50s and 60s, a lot of these techniques would have still been used because people would have kept books like this and would have continued to use the techniques written in them. They're actually really easy to find. You can find them on eBay. The last time I checked, I found multiples and they were around like £5. If I'm doing something and I'm torn between two techniques, like which technique to use for that specific seam or for that specific situation, I will check this book because it'll give me an idea of what people would have done at the time. It has a lot of ideas. It has a lot of tips and tricks. It shows you like how to take measurements. It does have a lot of information and a lot of knowledge here. It's also interesting to me the amount of implied knowledge that they assume you have. They assume that everyone at the time would have rudimentary sewing knowledge. Like you would know how to sew a button, you would know how to do very simple stitch, you would know basic sewing, you would know how to thread a needle, and you would know probably how to do a little bit of crochet and a little bit of knitting. They're like, okay, you already know how to do that, so we're going to teach you the next step. And I think that's really interesting because nowadays, if you've made a book like this nowadays, you would have to teach somebody how to thread a needle and what kind of needle to get and what kind of thread to buy. That was just implied knowledge at the time. And I think that's really interesting. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes not so much. And they do actually have different patterns in here that you can follow. How to make a coat for a baby of 6 months, brassiere for a medium figure, whatever that means. So a lot of it is like pretty vague, which is typical for patterns of this time period because they just, again, assumed you knew how to do things. How to make ladies' bedroom slippers. Oh, I might have to make some. It has a lot of information and it actually has a lot of pictures, and the pictures are great because, first of all, are you kidding? Like, who is she? How great is that? And you can tell that these were taken in the 30s. Their hair in the pictures is it's like very 30s hair, you know? Oh, here she is. Look at her. How provocative. Oh my God, look at them. It's just really cool to me, things like this. If you don't know how to sew and you don't know how to crochet or how to knit, I would not recommend you learn from this because you're going to be very frustrated. But if you do know how to do those things and you're interested in like vintage techniques, then I would recommend this. This book is 90 years old. Like, that's just really cool. This one is called Embroidery and Lace of Portugal. Essentially, it is a compendium of different types of embroidery and different types of lace. So it goes through different techniques and different types of designs and things that are traditional to the country. And it'll tell you like from this area they did this like this, and then from this area they did this like that. It has a lot of different stitches. It has lots of different designs. It has a bunch of pull-outs, designs and kind of patterns and stuff that you can use to recreate these traditional techniques. Now, the reason why this book is so cool to me is because of, I guess, the political and cultural situation of the country at the time when this was published. Even though I'm qualifying it and I'm explaining it to you as like an encyclopedia, it's really more of like a textbook. This was published by the government, by the Ministry of Education. This would have been like maybe a class that you took when you were in primary or secondary school. It might have been something that you could have collected to educate yourself on after you left school. I'm not not sure because obviously I was not allowed at the time, and I don't know anyone who had this class or who had used this. I found this book in a flea market, and the person who had it did not, they bought a bunch of old books and they didn't really know anything about it. What I do know about this book is that it was probably published in either 1970 or 1969. There's a 1969 on the outside of the book and then a 1970 on the inside. And we know that it's a third edition. One of the pages here at the front is missing. I imagine that's where the person who owned this originally would have written their name or something like that, and that's why the page was ripped out. Now, if you don't know any Portuguese history, then you still don't know why this is important, why this matters. During this time when this would have been published and written, we were living through a fascist dictatorship. So it only ended in 1974. This would have been published 4 years before the fall of the dictatorship. When you're reading this, it is very obvious that this is a job for a woman. At the time, women did not have a right to vote. They couldn't open bank accounts and all sorts of things like that. During that time, we had what we call the blue pencil. If you wanted a book published, if you wanted to publish your song or a news article, a screenplay, whatever, anything, any kind of written or spoken word that was meant to be published in any sort of way that would be delivered to the masses had to be censored. It had to go through an office of the government where they would read through it or listen through it, and then they would scribble out things that you are not allowed to say. If you wanted to have your work published, you would have to change it to exclude the things that they wanted you to exclude. And it's interesting because in a government that was forcing that type of censorship, I have here a book that was published by them, which means that every single word in this was approved by the government. And I think that's interesting because if you read through it like a book, you can see a lot of political and kind of social influence, or what they're trying to influence. So I think it's really interesting in that regard and in it being a piece of history in that sense. And it's also really interesting because it does have a lot of history about different stitches, about different types of embroidery, different types of lace. And I really don't want them to fall into oblivion, essentially. I guess I feel very strongly about textile history and techniques being forgotten because nobody's keeping them alive. I think it's cool that there was a textbook at one point, even if it's from a regime I did not agree with, that it was keeping something alive that I also think needs to stay alive, I would like to have more old books about different techniques from different countries, especially if they are techniques that are dying and that are being forgotten. I think it's really important that we don't let them be forgotten, I guess. I found something that was really funny. Right at the end, it has a list of other publications. There are some really funny titles in it. One of them is just Salt. My favorite one was Math is Not Hard. That's the one I really wanted to tell you about. Then we have The Art of Needlecraft, and I don't know who wrote this. I think there's a name on the side, but it's in very bad condition and you can't really see what it says. And this again is sort of an encyclopedia about anything that's kind of related to needlecrafts. This one is in worse condition, I think, than my complete needlecraft book, but I would say that this one is much more complete. It talks a lot about a lot more different types of needlecrafting and textile craft types and stuff. It also includes pictures and diagrams. It also includes patterns and things. I mean, look at her. Oh, she's so happy. This was published in 1936, I believe, so a little bit later than the other one, but I do think this one is more complete. It has more information. Why is there so much sun now? Because this book is in rougher condition, I don't tend to use it as much and consult it as much. I want to preserve it and I want to keep it alive for a long time. I think the diagrams in this one are better and the pictures are more clear in what they're trying to explain to you. In terms of the visuals, I think this one is better. In terms of the explanations, I think they're pretty similar. They also assume a lot of knowledge here, although less so in the less popular categories. And again, it's really cool to look back, check for techniques, check for how things are being done. I know that there are some people who like to recreate historical garments as closely and as historically accurately as possible. So they'll sew by hand and things like that. And they'll try to use techniques and materials that are as close to what they would have used in the past or in the period that they're trying to recreate as possible. If you are into that, then I think books like this are really interesting and are really important if you are interested in this time period, I guess. Last but not least, we have Make Do and Mend. Obviously, this is not the original because those are very difficult to come by. And this was originally actually like a leaflet and not a book that would have been distributed in the UK by the government. Yeah, it was first published in 1943. And this is a reprint from Imperial War Museums. You can go online and buy this for yourself if you're interested. And essentially there's tips and tricks on how to take care of your clothes, how to make sure they last you a long time, how to fix holes, how to repurpose wool from old sweaters or old socks into new things. It encourages you to like save things so that you can repurpose them. I think this is a really cool book in two ways. So first of all, it's very cool because it's like a piece of history, even though this is obviously a reprint, but all of the contents are a really cool glimpse into what life would have been like at the time, especially for women. There was rations on a lot of things, including clothing and fabric and materials for clothing. But you know, people still had to wear clothes every day. And they still had kids who, you know, needed new clothes pretty regularly because they were, you know, growing. Through like the implied knowledge, through little bits and pieces here and there, you can really pick up on like what it was like at the time and like a lot of cultural things of this period, which I think is really interesting. And it is my favorite period of fashion, both because I like the fashions of this time and also because I think it's very interesting to see directly how the events of the world impact fashion and style. Like you can always see that, but I think that wartime is way more clear. You can see that way more clearly than you could in other periods. So this is one of the eras that I just find really interesting. So that's one of the reasons why I find this really cool. And the other one is because nowadays we're talking about, you know, sustainability and making things last longer and taking better care of our clothes. And I think books like this, we can use this knowledge to do that today. Because even though a lot of the reasons why people had to make do and mend back in the day were financial or, you know, just lack of resources, a lot of those habits are actually very sustainable and very like eco-friendly, I guess. So things like thrifting, repurposing old things to make new things, frogging old sweaters to use the wool to make new sweaters, all of that stuff at the time was used because of lack of resources, but can now be used for sustainability reasons. So there's how to take care of your clothes, how to store them, how to avoid moths, which was a much bigger issue, I feel like, than now, because a lot of our clothes are made from synthetic materials, so moths don't want to eat plastic. I don't know, I just think this is a really cool book. It's really interesting. Out of all of the books that I've talked about today, this is probably one of the easiest one to find and you can buy it new. So I highly would recommend. So there you have it. That is my little collection of vintage books about textile crafts in general. Are you snoring? He's just breathing really loud. He's not actually snoring. So yeah, those are my books. I hope you enjoyed this more kind of chill video where we just hang out. I have some other cool old books. Like I have one called Zoology, but it actually isn't just about animals. It's also about like human anatomy. And that one is very old too. If you want to see more from me, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. I post on there a few times a week. And if you are not already, then you should consider subscribing to my channel. I post a new video every other Friday, usually. Oh, and if you want to support the channel, you can do so by leaving me a tip on my Ko-fi page. All of these things are going to be linked below, and I will leave you a list of all of the books that I mentioned. So yes, that is everything from me. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.